Hey y'all, let's talk about probably the trickiest of um, the assignments we've given you so far, which is going to be solving quadratic equations with complex roots. I watched the Khan Academy video for this, and it was a little bit hard to understand there at certain parts. So I'm gonna try to go over and clarify some of the things that I think may have been confusing. We need to remember a few things about quadratic equations before we kind of move on into this part. When we look at what we have here at our equation, you need to remember the standard form, which is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so whatever number is in front of your x squared term, which we have right here, is your a value. So our a for this equation is going to be 3. Likewise, whatever number's in front of your x is your b term. So our b is going to be 9, and whatever number you have by itself is your constant, is your c value. And we have 17. Now, it's important to remember that you take the sign with it. Here we have a positive, and a positive, so it's kind of easy to write here, and we're not going to mess it up. But if that were a negative 17, I would have to make C negative 17 in order to do this one. And then there's also a part in Math 2 that we need to review from Math 2, that is, that he kind of went over. Sometimes when we do the solve quadratic equations, sometimes when we do it, we get not so pretty answers. And sometimes that involves us taking the square root of -1. Well, you can't really take a square root of a negative number, and what we taught you in Math 2 is that when you take the square root of -1, that is equal to I. That's just something you're going to need to learn, memorize, lock in your brain, and remember it. Okay. And the way we're going to go ahead and solve this quadratic equation is we're going to use the quadratic formula. Hopefully y'all remember that. If you don't, let's write it down. It's the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay. So that is the quadratic formula. All right. And these B's, A's, and C's, those are going to come from these numbers that we just kind of laid out. So let's start by filling in our formula. We start with the opposite of B. That's the opposite sign. We have positive, so we'll make ours a -9 plus or minus the square root of B squared. So B here is 9 squared, minus, okay, 4 times A, our A is 3, times C, our C is going to be 17. Okay, and then all over 2 times A, our A is going to be 3. Okay. So here we're going to do a little bit just of kind of simple math, some algebra, and or rather some arithmetic, and go ahead and multiply and solve this. So I'm going to leave -9 for now out front, and I'm going to work on all this stuff that's kind of underneath our radical, our square root sign. Okay, 9 squared, which is just 9 times 9, gives us 81. Okay, then I'm going to subtract 4 times 3 times 17. I'm really wishing I had a calculator close by, but I don't. So I'm going to just do this by hand. 4 times 3 is 12, and we're going to multiply 12 times 17. 7 times 2 is 14. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. Um, 1 times 2 is 2, and 1 times 1 is 1. So I get, oh goodness, 8 and 2 is 0. And bring my 1. I get 204. Does that sound right? Okay. So I'm going to fill that in there, and then 2 times 3 is 6. Okay. And we're going to keep simplifying this in order to solve it. What you're going to notice here is that underneath our radical, underneath the square root, when we do this next step, when we're subtracting, we're going to have a negative number, right? Because 81 minus 204 is not going to give us a positive number. So you could always use your phone and go ahead and subtract those, or if you happen to have a calculator at your house, go ahead and subtract those. Whichever way you want to do it doesn't matter to me. You're going to end up getting, oh, where we go? Sorry, negative 123. Okay. And then we're going to put that all over 6 again. Okay. When we go ahead and solve these, remember what I told you about this rule up here, that the square root of negative 1 is going to be I. So here, when we work on solving this, we're going to get in an imaginary solution, and that's perfectly okay. That's what we kind of expect you to do. The way that I can rewrite this almost is into two different answers. If you'll think about it, when we talk about the solutions of a quadratic equation, it's the places where it crosses the x-axis, right? So a lot of times you do have two answers. And we can split this into two different things by rewriting it and putting the plus on one of them and the minus on the other. So up here, we're going to do negative 9 plus the square root of negative 123 over 6. And down here, I'm going to do negative 9 minus the square root of 123 all over 6. Okay. I could rewrite here what's underneath the radical to say negative 1 times 123 if I wanted to. And that's one way for me to pull out my I. Okay, so you're not changing anything. What you're doing is almost like, let's see, rewriting it just in a different form. So you could say it like this, that it's the same thing as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 123. And what that does is it allows me to pull out my I. Okay, and then I could do that same thing down here if I wanted to. Okay. Here, when you get to this step, you need to figure out if you can simplify what's underneath the radical. 123 happens to be a prime number, and what that means is that it's not divisible by anything but 1 in itself. So basically, the square root of 123 is as simplified as you can make this answer. So hopefully that isn't too confusing for you. It's going to take time and practice to understand this, and I understand that. if you had access to or have access to a scientific calculator, you could type these numbers in, the -9 plus the square root of a -123 divided by 6, and kind of see what you get. You could also always try to graph it in Desmos and see if that matches your answers. But let me know if you have any questions, and I will also go over some more examples of how to solve these complex roots quadratic equations. And hopefully, the more you see and the more you practice, the more familiar you get with it.